Hi there, I'm Jim Zirin. Welcome back for more conversations. Our subject today is China, COVID, trade, human rights, China's place in the world. With us is an authority on Chinese affairs. She is Elizabeth Economy, Senior Fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University. She is the author of a brilliant book entitled The Third Revolution, Xi Jinping and the New Chinese State. We're pleased to welcome Liz Economy back to the program. Liz, delighted to see you, delighted to have you with us. And let's start with the grisly subject of COVID. They say the curve is flattened in China, and with the statistics that have come out, they say they have 11 new cases every day. We have 60,000. They have 91,000 since it began, 4,739 deaths. We have 8 million since it began and 224,000 deaths. What accounts for this dramatic disparity?
Well, first, Jim, thanks. It's great to be back with you. And I think appropriate to be talking about this topic as we are still in the midst of this pandemic. So what accounts for this difference is really, in large part, our own administration, the Trump administration, which has been an abject failure in terms of addressing the pandemic. And so I think it would be a mistake, as many commentators have done, or many analysts have done, to assume that because China has done a very effective job of arresting the pandemic, that somehow this is a tribute to their authoritarian system, and that somehow democracies are not as able to address it just because the United States has not done a good job. Because many democracies have, in fact, done a very good job of fighting back against the COVID-19. So Taiwan is an exemplar, South Korea, Germany, New Zealand. There are many cases, of states that have managed to educate their populace, to undertake the appropriate measures, and to stop this virus, almost as soon as it hit. So I know that there is this sense somehow that we should be comparing the United States and China as system types, and that we should draw some, significant lessons. But I don't think that that's the case. I think the United States has been, not uniquely, but certainly very terribly at the bottom of the pile in terms of addressing this.
Well, at the beginning of the pandemic, Trump was full of praise for Xi and said he'd handle the thing marvelously and applauded his transparency. And then something happened. Now it's the China virus, and it's really China that was responsible for giving it to us in the first place. I mean, what accounts for the change? Is this legitimate, or is this just posturing?
So, certainly, the virus originated in China, and, within the first several weeks, even really the first month of the spread within China, there is an argument, and I think a valid one, to be made that had the Chinese government been more transparent, had they not had this culture of fear, not clamp down on the doctors who tried to warn the people initially about the virus, that in fact they could have alerted the international community much earlier than they did, and that this allowed for the spread of the virus outside the country. So I do think that there is some truth to the accusation that had China managed it better at the outset, that parts of the world would not have confronted it at all, perhaps. But that does not, in any way address the issue of how we handled it once the virus had spread here. And I think the president is simply looking for someone to blame, again, for what has been an abject failure on the part of the administration. And, calling it the China virus and this kind of rhetorical, hype, it doesn't do anybody any good. What we should be doing is focusing on what we need to do to address it and to arrest it.
What about the vaccine? In the city of Zhejiang, China has begun, even as we speak, to distribute vaccine on a trial basis. We hear that it's going to be a long time before there's a distributable vaccine here in the United States, sometime in 2021, if then. Is that evidence that their system is more efficient?
Well, I think probably, look, certainly China has made great strides in, pharmaceuticals and research and development. But I think what we're looking at in this case is the fact that the United States simply has much more stringent rules and regulations for the approval process of new vaccines and new treatments than China does. And, frankly speaking, this is an area where I would be much more inclined to trust what would come out of the United States than what would come out of China, if only because the history of China with regard to things like product safety, food safety, is not a very good one. And so I would prefer to see China take relatively more rather than less time in terms of its trials and testing and having something that was proven to work, as opposed to trying to rush through some new vaccine that may or may not actually either address the issue or may have longer term side effects that they simply didn't take the time to ascertain. So I don't know that it's, the Chinese somehow just doing a better job of getting at a vaccine as much as it is that they just have a much shorter time for their, testing and approval process.
Will COVID at all affect China's foreign policy?
Well, I think we've seen already some of the ways in which it's affected its foreign policy. And, one of the things that's come out of the COVID-19 pandemic, I think, has been a new awareness, frankly speaking, of the sort of bullying and authoritarian nature of Chinese diplomats and foreign policy. I'm sure you've heard the term wolf warrior diplomacy, which refers to, a couple of movies that came out, which Chinese, elite forces, rescue people away from the terrible American and other mercenaries. But basically these diplomats, went out, have fanned out across the world, spreading disinformation, threatening countries, with withholding sort of the medical supplies that China had available to sell and to donate if they didn't publicly thank China for the assistance, or when Australia said that it wanted to see an investigation into the origins of the virus, because we still haven't actually ascertained precisely where this virus originated from. The Chinese stopped buying beef and put tariffs on their barley, and have continued with a range of other economic sanctions. So this kind of threatening and bullying behavior, I think, really, was to the detriment of China. And beyond that, of course, we saw very aggressive action out of China in the South China Sea, right in the midst of the pandemic. I mean, at the very height of the pandemic, it's actually pretty shocking. China's out there sinking a Vietnamese fishing boat, undertaking pretty aggressive action in territorial waters around Malaysia and Indonesia, passing the Hong Kong National Security Act, which basically now has transformed Hong Kong, just into another Chinese city, just to completely crack down on Hong Kong's political and civil rights. So all of this aggressive action and this threatening rhetoric, I think, really basically made the Chinese diplomats, what should have been a diplomatic win for China, turn into really a diplomatic debacle.
Let's turn to trade. For some period of time, Trump tried to make a deal with China. He thought he was on the verge of a trade deal. And then something happened. And now we're in the midst of a trade war. Negotiation has morphed into confrontation. How would you characterize our current relationship?
I think in the pretty much 25 years that I've been studying China, I have not seen the relationship at such a low point. We essentially have no diplomatic engagement with China at this point. Our bilateral framework that we had developed just to talk to the Chinese, to talk to Chinese officials, has atrophied. And certainly you're right. I mean, right when COVID hit, we had just signed the phase 1 trade deal. And, I think we're somewhat hopeful. Some people were somewhat hopeful that there might be a phase 2. But it's unlikely that the Chinese will completely fulfill phase 1, which in essence was just buying more American goods in order to redress the bilateral trade deficit, which was really President Trump's biggest, concern in the entire relationship with China, and one that economists felt was not the right way to even look at the issue, look at the problem. Phase two is supposed to deal with the actual issues and problems in the U.S.-China trade relationship. And that's the intellectual property theft and the subsidies and the state-directed nature and the market barriers to entry for American firms. So all of those issues, which actually are important and need to be addressed, are clearly not going to be addressed. And there's essentially no hope at this point that we're going to move forward with real trade negotiations for a phase two trade deal. So what happened, COVID-19 certainly interrupted things, but beyond that, it's just the really truly hard work of negotiating the trade deal, I think, was something that President Trump, even if the Ambassador Lighthizer had the patience for it, I don't think President Trump did.
Well, Kevin Rudd, the former Australian Prime Minister, says we're in the middle of an economic Cold War with China. Would you agree with that?
I mean, I think it goes beyond an economic Cold War. I think the danger is that we're on a precipice of a real Cold War, and one that engages not just a sort of bifurcation of the world into sort of two different technological, national security, and economic spheres. But also there's an ideological component to this, which I think is still under debate here in the United States about whether this is happening. But from my perspective, China certainly is exporting elements of authoritarianism around the world, parts of its system, in ways that are reinforcing authoritarian systems in other countries, and providing them with the technological tools, doing political training for officials on how to control civil society, how to monitor the internet, all of things that China does at home, it's exporting abroad. And so I am quite concerned, actually, that when you look across issues like technology, and the decoupling process that seems to be underway, when you look at the economic issues now with the entities lists and new investment screening that's going on in both countries and parts of the rest of the world, that in fact, and certainly the security confrontation, especially in around Taiwan and the South China Sea, and the fact that we don't have any real framework for discussion and negotiation, I think we are in at a very dangerous moment in the relationship.
Well, we've moved aircraft carriers. The Cold War could become a hot war. We've moved aircraft carriers into the South China Sea. And then, so we've probably embarked on a policy of confrontation with China. When you couple that with blocking China tech companies from doing business in the United States, or as we started to do with TikTok and WeChat, we just seem to be going on a slippery slope to serious confrontation with the world's largest emerging economy.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that the challenge really is that the administration is not wrong in many respects to look across the full scope of the U.S.-China relationship and to identify areas where perhaps China has taken advantage of the United States, or where China is posing new kinds of challenges that we hadn't seen previously. I think there is a recognition that China under Xi Jinping is a fundamentally different country than it was in the pre-Xi era, that the ambition is much greater, and that Xi's China does pose new kinds of challenges to the United States that need to be addressed. So I think in the sense that the administration has undertaken a reset of China policy, sort of rethought it and reset it, that's important. I think where we're missing the boat in a dangerous way, as you suggest, is that it's not clear that the administration has a sense for what is the end objective. What is it when the administration looks out 5 or 10 years from now? What do they want to see in the US-China relationship? What is their vision for the United States, its place in the world, and its relationship to China? And so rather than have a sort of strategic objective toward which we are organizing all of our efforts, I think it's just pushback, pushback, pushback. And there's always something more that one can do. As you say, there's WeChat, then there's TikTok, and there will be some other new platform or app that is of concern to us. But what we should be doing is thinking through in a strategic way, where do we want to be and how do we get there? And I think that's the biggest flaw, at least in US-China policy today.
Well, you're channeling Henry Kissinger, who loved to say, what are we trying to accomplish here? But let's just take a look at what have we accomplished with the trade war. When Trump took office, the trade deficit was around 735 billion, and now it's 854 billion. So is Trump right that it's important to punish China in some way? And what does that do for the United States? He says he's for America first. I think it looks as though it's America alone.
Yeah, it's not only just America alone, which would be okay if it were America alone and right, but it's just America alone and wrong on this one. And so, yeah, I think you said it all in the numbers that you just put out there. And you know, the economists were right. This is not the way to approach the concern over U.S.'s relative share, or sort of our desire to be able to export more to China. That should be addressed through sort of fundamental regulations and laws and agreements with China that make China have an even playing field. Even if somehow the president had magically managed to redress the bilateral trade deficit for 2 years through all of these new purchases, what did he expect was going to happen after that? All of the same issues were still there.
Is it true, as he says, that we were losing jobs to China, American jobs, and American companies were moving to China, particularly in the auto industry?
Well, I mean, certainly it's true. We've lost jobs, to countries all over the world. It's part of the way, it's kind of the bargain that we made when we decided that globalization was, a world in which we wanted to live, a globalized world. But what we should have been doing as sort of low-cost, low-end manufacturing jobs were moving outside the country is figuring out how to train and develop new skills for more advanced manufacturing in our country, right? And I mean, these are things we know that we should be doing, and we simply haven't done them. And the answer is not really to try to bring back jobs and coal mining jobs. The answer is, to move forward with, for example, new energy technologies, right? And to develop the skills in our workforce to be able to do that, because that is not only the future for the United States, it's the future for the world. And why don't we want to be at the leading edge of that technology revolution? So I think, a major flaw in President Trump's approach was, a backward look and not a forward look, again, for where the United States wants to be in the future, not trying to recreate an America of the past.
Did Trump get any of it right in your judgment?
I think, to my mind, what the administration got right, and I don't really give credit to President Trump for this, because President Trump really had only two priorities in the relationship with China. One was redressing the bilateral trade deficit and dealing with North Korea. And the dealing with North Korea, of course, was important, but that didn't happen, actually. So in the end, right, we've made no progress with North Korea. Everything else that I think this administration has gotten right, for example, rebooting the Quad, right, the partnership with India and Australia and Japan, strengthening partnerships with other countries in Asia, for example, Vietnam. All of that has come out of other members of the Trump administration, our pushback on China and human rights, all of these things in Xinjiang. I think the administration has done a good job of stepping up to the plate, and in some cases leading even globally. On the issue of Huawei, I think it's fair to say that countries in Europe and elsewhere, Japan and Australia excluded from this, would not have sort of looked at Huawei through the same national security lens as they have now, with the same level of concern as they have now, had it not been for the Trump administration, sounding the alarm. So I give the Trump administration, people, the Asia hands in the National Security Council and the State Department, credit for recognizing these challenges and developing policies to deal with some of them. But it's not the president. You don't hear the president out there talking about a free and open Indo-Pacific. There's nothing about the United States leading on the global stage. All the elements of leadership that the United States has managed to eke out over the past 3 years have come because of other officials in his administration.
Well, how long is all this going to last? Jack Ma, the billionaire who came from nothing and founded Alibaba, says it's going to last 20 years. Is that a fair estimate?
Yeah, I'm a little bit more optimistic that the trade war does not have to last 20 years. I think that there's the possibility with the new administration in the United States, with partnership with European Union and our Asian allies, and with some degree of interest among economic reformers in China, that we can begin to make some progress. It's not looking good right now. I think that's true. And the overall direction in which Xi Jinping is moving the country is not the right one. And his whole new dual circulation theory, which he's now put forward, is all about basically developing a closed loop of manufacturing, investment, and the domestic economy will become basically 80% self-sufficient. So I think that's not a good sign. But I do think if we can create an external environment through trade agreements, bilateral investment treaties, other things that incentivizes China to rejoin the world economy on terms that are fair, that's the way to go. But that requires a very different administration in the White House. Barring that, Jack Ma is probably right.
We really haven't deterred them from their human rights violations. No matter what we've done, we almost signaled that it was all right for them to incarcerate the Muslim sect, the Uyghurs, in the concentration camp. The move on the publisher Gung Shonan, who supported the constitutional law professor who was protesting against the government. I mean, there are all these, and also the intercepting the people who tried to escape to Taiwan from Hong Kong on a boat, and I guess they're still in jail. So the political crimes persist, and we haven't really done much about registering any sort of protest.
Well, here again, I would say that the administration, President Trump, no. And I think a couple of books that have come out recently have made it clear that he has no interest in human rights. But if you look again at the National Security Council, the people there, the people at the State Department, they actually take these issues very, very seriously. And so we have been at the forefront in the United States, and Congress, I would say, which traditionally has played a very strong role in the human rights area with regard to China. We passed the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act in Congress. We put sanctions on Hong Kong officials, on Xinjiang and other Chinese officials. We've, pushed to have American corporations, ensure that they're not sourcing from Xinjiang. So we have tried, I think. But the problem is that in the end, these are just after the fact sticks. And they don't have an impact, I think is what you're saying, and rightly saying. They don't actually have an impact in changing Chinese behavior.
Also, what do you make of Trump's business dealings in China? He paid 250 times as much in taxes to China, it was reported, than he paid to the Internal Revenue Service.
Jim, I don't think there are words that could express what I happen to think about that.
No words to express it. So anyway, let me ask you a question, Liz. Where do you see the U.S.-China relationship going over the next decade?
I think it's going to be challenging, no matter who is in the White House. I do think if we end up with the Biden administration, beginning in 2021, that at the very least, I think two really important things will happen. Number one, I think the United States will begin to recapture, to reclaim some of its leadership on the global stage in terms of addressing global challenges, things like the pandemic or global climate change, refugees. all of those issues where the rest of the world, looked to the U.S. for leadership, admired the United States for its leadership. I think a Biden administration will, begin to move back into that direction. And I think that's hugely important. And it's hugely important in dealing with China because we left a vacuum of leadership. China could have filled it. It's only by the grace of God that Xi Jinping doesn't actually have the wherewithal to do the right thing on the global stage in many respects. So China couldn't fill it, but we need to be back in action. The other thing I think that's important that will happen is that we will reconstitute some form of a bilateral framework with China. We will, I think, try to find a few areas of common ground and common purpose. And so in that way, put a floor underneath, this relationship, which seems to be spiraling down. And of course, my big hope is that we will, in the end, have a strategy for China, not just something where we just keep pushing back without a sense of where we want to see this relationship end up.
Spiraling down, but all is not lost if we can possibly evolve a strategy. Liz, has been just marvelous, a terrific, terrific exchange. And I want to thank you for coming by. And thank you for coming by. Tune in next week for more conversations. I'm Jim Zirin. Stay well, be safe, and all the best.